Welcome once again to 26 North Halsted. I am your host, George Blaze, and man, there's so much going on in terms of technology. I don't know if you guys caught a couple of weeks ago, but our good friend Mark Zuckerberg was testifying before the Senate Judiciary Committee about issues that people were having with Cambridge Analytica and how they got people's personal information, were able to use that information in the 2016 presidential campaign. It became a whole thing, but I thought it was a fascinating moment in history, and if you haven't had a chance to go back and actually watch that entire sequence of events and the questioning coming from the Senate, you really, really should, because buried within that conversation, within that testimony, are little bits and pieces of questions that all of you should ask, and everyone should really try to educate themselves on in terms of technology, social media, and how all this stuff works, and where we should be setting our expectations in terms of privacy and moving forward, how it's going to change our lives. Joining me today is my tech guru. He's a writer, software developer, former radio host, WHPK, just a good man altogether, Szczepanczyk. Great to see you. It's been a couple of years.
Year and a half, but
a year and a half.
Quite a while, and it's great to be again with you, George.
I mean, just for people don't know, for over 10 years you were host of a radio show on WHPK, and then right. I don't know, bed bugs infested the studio and they fired everyone. I don't know how that worked.
That basically is what it boils down to. Yeah,
it's a whole nother story, but it's good to see you regardless. And I'm sure you've been paying attention to all this stuff that's been going on. But let's start there with this Senate Judiciary Committee testimony by Mark Zuckerberg. Did you watch it?
Commerce.
And Commerce. Oh, it's two. Okay, so I only was referring to the one.
Together as one in Senate. Not just the Senate.
What are some of the things that you gleaned from what you saw there?
There's a lot, and we're probably only going to be able to scratch the surface on that. The biggest thing about this is that we've really opened a big can of worms in the whole set of this. Not the least of which is that everyone is losing their mind over a leak that actually happened 3 years ago. Cambridge Analytica, what happened was actually set up a survey, which you can do when you're a registered software developer on Facebook, and got a fair number of responses, more than 370,000. Thing is, a developer working with that discovered a flaw in Facebook software that they could actually use to get a whole lot more information, to the tune of, at least as thus far disclosed, 87 million accounts. Wow. Yeah, so it was, and this has been out there for 3 years. It turns out that the Ted Cruz for President campaign had access to this data. Why is this now a big issue? The biggest reason has to do with the disclosure that Channel 4 in Britain had actually done a sting of people at Cambridge Analytica where they had caught them on video admitting that this information could be used to blackmail politicians. Politicians are now freaking out, understandably, about this. Most anyone would. Yeah, this is pretty sensitive information. And they're
pretty sensitive, I mean, and not just, your gender, the things you like, if you like cat videos or what have you, but really specific stuff about the types of things you're posting, the context of it. I mean, are they getting actual data like text messages and what have you? Were they able to access that deep into it?
Probably not that deep, but quite a lot of demographic and, as they call it, psychographic information, and things that you would not figure like you would be able to extract out. It'd be kind of things like, could the information of what you're posting lead you to the likelihood of that you're going to be that you have an increased chance of clinical depression? Right. It gets down that deep, and that's what's really scary about this, is that you would figure that like this kind of content information, what at least Facebook discloses of 90 different individual data points, not just like, are you married or not, do you have kids or not, where do you live, what's your political affiliation, who do you tend to vote for, or who do you tend to repost as far as sources go that could be correlated with who you might vote for, things like that. But it's like, add that in the aggregate as well as a whole lot of more that Facebook probably collects but hasn't disclosed yet. Right. Add the entire aggregate sum of that, and then suddenly you've got a very piercing perspective into you, and probably in more that you might not even know about yourself.
One of the things I found fascinating was in some of the responses that Mark Zuckerberg was giving to some of the questioning, people took it as he's being glib, or he's got some kind of spectrum disorder or something. And it's like, no, actually, this is a very brilliant person, obviously, who is trying to be as respectful as possible and not say the nature of your question reflects your total ignorance of what we do and what this is all about. And that kept coming up and again, and I kept feeling that, like, well, it's not that he's being obtuse or evasive. It's like your question reflects an ignorance that we don't have time in this 5 minutes for me to answer.
Yeah, and that's what's unfair about that. The format of the testimony, even at the longest level of the senators, they each had, per the format, 5 minutes to ask questions and get answers. The aggregate about that. Talk with anyone who's, and I've worked as a software engineer professionally for 18 years. That's not a lot of time to be able to get something to a degree of precision, especially when you're dealing with something as complicated as software code. That gets kind of complicated. And you need to have the time to be able to explicate that out, especially if you're asking for someone who wants a fair answer. But to be able to give a fair answer, you need the time.
Right.
Otherwise, I could point to my GitHub repository. What's GitHub? Okay, now I got to spend another minute to explain what GitHub is.
Which explains why over and over again he's like, well, I can have my team get back to you on that. That's not him being evasive. It's like literally it's going to take 400 pages and 10 people to sit in a room with you to kind of even give you a broad picture of how this all
even there, what we had seen with regards to the Cambridge Analytica leak, this is someone who had discovered a leak from people who had built it.
Right.
And they was just like, oh, yeah, crap. That's bad. And it's like people you would figure would have the insight into this and who spent the time to build it, and then someone else discovers a bug. That's fair. I mean, if the software is out there to be able to be openly reviewed, you can have this kind of peer review and figure this out. But if you're not, then yeah, someone could find it and exploit that. And that's what we see in this case.
And that's the danger there. Let's take a short break. When we come back, we're going to have more. We're going to talk about privacy issues, because that seems to be the other thing people are freaking out about. Stay tuned. More when we come back. Welcome back. 26 North Halsted today. I fasten your seatbelt, strap in. Mitchell Szczepanczyk is here. I know he talks a mile a minute, but his brain is one of the reasons why I'm going to be a billionaire one day, is sticking around this guy. It's complex issues. Clearly, as a software developer yourself, you clearly have an understanding of the depth and the breadth of what it would take to really explain in a 5-minute conversation about what happened here. But the main thing is, I think that these senators and this other congressional committee, their knee-jerk reaction is that, well, obviously we have to regulate this like we do utilities because of the number of people who use it. Is that, I don't know, is that too reactionary? Is that a safe angle to be looking at?
I actually think not a bad thing. The thing is, would it help in whatever regard? So, like, for example, say, take what a lot of people would regard as an extreme proposal, force Facebook to divest of some of their holdings. So you probably have them sell off Instagram, sell off WhatsApp. By the way, Facebook owns Instagram and WhatsApp. Oh. So if you're using those are Facebook
That's interesting,
properties.
Because Mark Zuckerberg kind of made it sound like, I don't know about WhatsApp, that's not mine. But
no, he did testify it a little bit. Yeah. He knows some about it. All but right. It's, I mean, one idea might be, those are major companies in and of their own right. So maybe spin those off. But then again, even if you do that, even if you have them spin off maybe even all of their properties, Facebook itself has a whole lot of influence, a social graph as it's called, the connections between and of information about people and their respective connections. And then all the respective connections they all have, now encompassing probably more than 2 billion people?
So are we at
7 billion people
Are we at a moment with, Facebook in particular, and perhaps some of these other companies that we were with Ma Bell back in the day, where they had to break up the telephone company because it was just too big, it was too monopolized, and there's no way to manage how it's going?
Something maybe that extreme might be called for here, but the thing is, what's your end game? What would be your goal here?
Right.
I mean, you could, tell Facebook to break itself up into dozens of companies, or maybe even do something where maybe Facebook would have it, but you've got to, say, disclose all of its software, make all of the code it uses to run its website and everything it does underneath the hood open source, so that if anyone wanted to view that, if I wanted to view that, I could just go to their GitHub account, which is a website where people will source and store a lot of software code for review. And then I can just take a look, or anyone can. And
Do you find it strange that Mark Zuckerberg has chosen not to go that route? When you look at things like Apache and what have you, that are kind of the underpinnings of much of the internet, the way we use it, much of the browsers we use today are open source.
I don't blame him for doing that, mainly because we don't know exactly what's going on behind the scenes. The default situation there is along the lines of keeping things secret. Because we don't know what's going on, and there's a lot of money going involved here. Both Facebook and Google, those two companies alone, now command probably upwards of 2/3 of all the advertising dollars in the United States,
right,
and upwards of that in the world. And especially where, to bring this to something like journalism, where newspapers are hurting, a lot of their ad dollars are going to Google and Facebook.
Right.
And so where Google and Facebook have actually been criticized in that regard, and to their credit, they're actually spending a little bit of that money toward, pro-journalism initiatives. Good. The problem is that the money that they're earmarking for that is much, much less than the amount of money that they make per year in this stuff.
Right.
It's good that they're doing it. They need to do a lot more than just that.
And one of the points I was educated on in watching the testimony was this fact that he made it clear. It's like we don't sell your information to advertisers. We sell access to what we know about you,
right,
to advertisers to better place their ads in front of the faces they need to do. So they kind of hold the information and kind of sell the ability for them to target it, what have you. And one of the senators, I can't remember if it was Cruz or someone else, asked him, well, do you feel that people's information is safer with you than it is the U.S. government? He's like, well, yeah, frankly, yes. And that was one of those poignant moments where it was like, no clapping in the gallery or something.
On what basis?
Right.
I mean, you can certainly say that. It's just like the proof is in the pudding. How can you make that claim? And then you have to lead to questions about what are standards of security and safety and privacy in this regard. I mean, you're just because you don't show it publicly doesn't necessarily mean it's safe. It certainly wasn't in the case of Cambridge Analytica. I mean, one developer with one key that it was authorized to get was able to break his way in and extract a whole lot of information it wasn't allowed to, and then release that out. And suddenly you're just like saying, just because, you think you're a better resource, well, how come you had this leak happen? Yeah, you can patch this up, but how do you know that, this won't happen again?
That there's not some other kind of leak or some other kind of way.
You would figure, even perversely enough, it would probably be in their better interest to make that code open source. You would find this especially in a lot of algorithms for handling security. The security is not in the algorithm. It's usually in some very small specified key that, like, for example, is a prime number at least 200 digits long.
Right.
I mean, good luck trying to find or memorize that.
And I think at this point, we're far enough down the line, and there's a very recent example of that. What makes me believe this is true, where companies like Facebook and platforms like Instagram are safe at this point to release and make it open source. Because you look at in the last couple of years or so, there was a social media platform called Vero. It started in Europe, and it's just kind of launched here in the last 10 months or what have you. Much like Instagram, has a lot of bits and pieces that are actually better and function better than Instagram as far as, viewing pictures full size and the way it's set up and the way you can kind of organize and tier people's access on your own page as opposed to having multiple pages.
Right.
But Instagram is so huge, it's at a point now where it's like, well, that's great. We can just steal those ideas and apply it to our platform. We don't have to worry about the competition. Whereas I think, 5 years ago, they may have been more worried about sharing their open source
Welcome
code.
to the modus operandi of how Facebook, and we're really talking about how Facebook works when you're talking about Instagram, because they bought them out 6 years ago, works. That they will try to, when they see a competitor, they will try to woo them. They may try to buy them out. They did that in the case of Instagram, but they were in a rivalry with Twitter to do that and wound up winning that race. Or they might just, if they won't play ball with you, they'll just steal your ideas and try to apply that anyway. So yeah, this is, welcome to their business model, so to speak.
Well, can't fault people for trying to make money, and that's the other side of it.
Right.
It is a private held company. He is an entrepreneur. I think one of the statements that I think he could have stated better, that he didn't go there to perhaps to not seem arrogant, is to be like, mistakes are made along the way. What we are doing here at Facebook is we have changed the way people communicate. We are changing the way society operates in a lot of ways. And in the same way that NASA, we've lost astronauts, but you wouldn't say shut NASA down and let's not do this endeavor because there were mistakes made along the way. We are changing fundamentally how people operate. Not
to say that you shouldn't try to pursue progress, advanced technology, and, sometimes you may stumble and fall as you're moving along. But this is not exactly a new game for Mark Zuckerberg. You can actually read this in the closest thing to a biography about him, The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick, that's based the book which the movie The Social Network was based. You read that book, you actually discover that he's actually had to play this game before. In fact, 15 years ago, back in 2003, when Mark Zuckerberg was then a freshman at Harvard University, everyone knows about the app Face Mash that he had made because it's mentioned in the movie. It turns out they didn't mention that he actually had to face what they called an ad board, an advisory board that could have expelled him from Harvard if they caught that. He did a mea culpa, apologizing for it, promising not to do it again. And they actually let him off with a small penalty and let him stay in school. He later dropped out to found Facebook. The point, though, being that he's had to play this game of an apologia in public before a body that could have done him serious harm before.
Right.
So he's got a little bit of practice in this regard. But the thing is, you got to be careful in what you're doing here first. In the case of Face Mash, turns out that was actually released by accident. He actually spent one evening over the course of building out a prototype and then emailed a number of people, and it spread like wildfire just by that alone. And then he kind of realized the potential about that, and he realized, wait a minute, if I could do it with this, maybe I could do this more broadly. And that was how...
And these are the same kind of mistakes we're seeing when we see things like the Cash Me Outside girl making hip-hop records now. It's the same viral thing. You release something that's silly, and you're not expecting it to get out there. Next thing you know, you got Bad Baby.
World. You got to be careful with what you release.
I tell you what, let's take a short break. When we come back, I want to get into a little bit about cryptocurrencies, because this is related in certain ways. The Winklevoss twins are involved, so we'll be back with more in just a moment. Welcome back to 26 North Halsted. Today talking with software developer and just media overall activist Mitchell Szczepanczyk, all about, man, a whole lot of things. Not a lot of time here. Very complicated stuff, but luckily there's resources out there that people can reach out. Of course, they can go to your website. You haven't been blogging as often as I would like you to.
Family obligations.
I understand
but,
that. I have them as
well. Things happens, but we'll see what you can do about it.
Well, you know, a few months back, I downloaded an app called Coinbase, and I started buying some Bitcoin right when it was around $18,000. And I was like, okay, here's my big thing. You know, first it was, the walking taco truck, which didn't work out. And I figured, you know, maybe Bitcoin is a way for me to get rich. And at this point, as we're speaking now, I think Bitcoin is down somewhere around $6,000 or $7,000. It's precipitous drop in a very short period of time.
Right.
Some people are saying this is all just a big fraud. It's all just a con game. It's all, you shouldn't get involved in it. Other people are saying this is the future, particularly when we're, you know, talking about blockchain and the technology behind it, that there's a lot of applications for this that go beyond the currency aspect of it that are so important for people to really understand.
I could delve into the technical details. I'm actually going to spend maybe a minute or so to talk about that because I think it's worth it to expound upon where it goes next. Imagine you're taking a bit is a binary digit, a 0 or a 1. That's a bit. Now take a bit and take 256 of those bits. That could be a signature for something. Now, if I were to pick a random sequence of 256 bits, and then you were to pick a random sequence of 256 bits, there's a very, very good chance that the one you pick isn't going to be the one I pick. That's a good thing, because that actually means that it's going to be reasonably secure. That's basically the basis of what blockchain is built on. I would take this representing something. And this is actually not a new idea. You actually use this to represent, for example, secure signatures in emails.
Okay.
Here, you're actually using this as the basis to represent financial transactions. So I would have this to be a signature for that I have some money in my bank account, the equivalent of a check, basically. And then you do the same thing. And then I have your bit, your bit strings, it's called, your list of 256 bits that you randomly selected and it's yours, is now connected to mine. You just basically make a pointer from one to the other. And then you repeat that process from one chain and its pointer to one chain to another and repeat that. And then you basically expand that out. Voila, you just have developed a cryptocurrency. Except that where before these were basically signatures to verify that you were you as far as signing some email or maybe even some legal document, now it's representing financial transactions. And that's actually can be represented as a good thing if all the transactions are valid.
Okay.
And maybe they're not, and that's the rub here.
Okay.
The fault of this, and why I actually will admit to you up front, I don't use any kind of blockchain-based currency. I don't use Bitcoin, even though I've got resources that I could avail myself of. I choose not to, precisely because there's that social element about that. Assuming that the check I write is valid, you're good.
But I
if
thought
it
the
bounces,
whole point of
you're
it,
not.
the whole
And
point of
that's
the innovation of it is that every user in the blockchain, it's verified through multiple nodes and multiple sources that verify the transaction. I thought that was the whole point.
That's the idea behind that, and assuming that everyone behind that is, yes, you should be golden, and that's a big reason why you've seen these currencies that could represent a whole lot of money be very successful and reach tens of thousands of dollars per Bitcoin. So yeah, if there's something behind that, yes, but if there isn't, and we're actually seeing research now, one researcher, Nicholas, whose name I'm forgetting, but he has a presentation that you can see in the University of California, Berkeley's website. He's actually already given a couple of presentations. It's worth looking into. If you were to look up searches regarding Berkeley Bitcoin cryptocurrencies, you'll probably find it and see the presentations he's giving. He has been researching this stuff for about 5 years, and he is exceedingly skeptical about it.
Well, what makes me, the skepticism I carry about it is when you see things like there was that Mt. Gox that vanished with everybody's money. And there have been 2 or 3 giant cases like that where multi-millions, if not billions of dollars worth of Bitcoin vanish in a second and nobody can answer for it, where it's gone or who's used it. Yep. The FBI, in doing their case against the Pirate Bay, Bitcoin was stolen by FBI agents in that investigation. Right. Where is that? These things are happening.
Yeah, this is one of the complaints regarding Bitcoin that Nicholas from Berkeley raises, that we're basically rehashing about 200 years of bad money models, where it'll be like, Ponzi schemes or bait and switch schemes, or other things where I promise you that you'll be able to turn that dollar you give me into $10 back. So just give me $1 and then you never see it again.
Nobody seems to have that trepidation when we talk about quantitative easing that the Federal Reserve does, where it's basically point printer out of window, insert dollar bill, print more dollar bills. Like, that's what they're doing.
They're in the difference in that case, and this is one point that's been raised, you've got that backed behind the full faith and security of the U.S. government. So there's some point that could be raised there that, yeah, you can print it out, but the U.S. government is doing it, and they've got some muscle to be able to back that up and say that it's currency, and people will recognize that. For, some two-bit shyster who's just, printing this out in their, in some spare room of their house. Right. That's a different story. And there's not to say that that could be valid. Right. If some way to back that up. It just might not be, and that's a big reason why I think there's got to be cautious with dealing with this stuff.
And that seems to be the reason why the banking industry is kind of pushing cryptocurrencies down, if not sabotaging it entirely.
Not to say that they're not doing some explorations about the technology and its applications, but if you're dealing with these major banks, they've got resources to be able to put on this, so they've actually got something that people can actually rely on that you'd figure would be somewhat valid. But and they may be able to push this into positive directions. Whether or not that, but not to put all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. Well, it might not work.
Well, I certainly think, I don't know, we'll have to follow this stuff further. The story is not told yet, but perhaps a full audit of the Federal Reserve may be in order so that we can all feel confident about the whole thing.
More open source.
Let's take a short break. We'll have some closing thoughts in just a moment. Welcome back. You can undo your seatbelt now. I'm going to slow things down. We're coming to the end of the show now. It's a lot of information. These things are very technical and very complicated, but the main important thing that I want to get out is educate yourself. Don't just sit out here making opinions about stuff based on something, 5 lines you wrote at the top of a Wall Street Journal article. There's really more to it than that, and, for whatever time you have to research it and study it, and, every time I have you on here, Mitchell, and I should have set this up a little bit earlier, is I ask you, for people who really want to get more educated about some of the issues we've been talking about here, you recommended one speaker, one book.
Nicholas, and I'm going to kick myself as soon as we're done with the show. He's on the faculty at the University of California, Berkeley, in their computer science department. Okay. You follow the threads regarding Nicholas, cryptocurrencies, and Berkeley. You'll find him in the presentations he's done. He's doing a lot now because he's been researching it the last 5 years, and everyone cares now. So yeah, that's one resource regarding a critical eye regarding cryptocurrencies, and one that I think we need in this day and age where even if it doesn't bill up to the hype, it's still going to be very important. As far as other resources of a technical nature, gold standard of resources I always recommend, and it sounds more intimidating, but don't be by the name, Hacker News. It's a website that is a gathering of information of a lot of technical stuff. You can use it as an entree for as easy or as deep as you want for a whole lot of these issues and more. So you can look up Hacker News online by the Y Combinator resource out of California. And regarding Facebook itself, we mentioned the book, The Accidental Billionaires by Ben Mesrick. I read that book. The book, I recommend reading it still because it kind of leads, even though Mark Zuckerberg was not interviewed for that book, it leads a lot of insight into what was kind of motivating him when he started Facebook.
Right, and we just have a couple of seconds left here, but you know, so much has happened in the last 12 years as far as social media and this stuff. What's the next 12 years going to look like? Are we going to see another revolution of this kind happen within the next 5-10 years?
Yes and no. The technology is going to continue to advance. I think the issue is, are enough people going to maybe arrange themselves writ large in ways that would best leverage that technology? We've got a lot of cool things that you can do, a lot of amazing things, and the barrier to entry is not high. It doesn't take very much effort to be able to do stuff with it, and it's a lot. The question there is, how do we do it, and is it done for the best good?
Isn't that an old Eric Clapton song? It's in the way that you use it.
Yes.
Well, thank you, Mitchell. It's great seeing you again. Thank you for joining us. We'll see you next week on 26 North Halsted.